So I've prepared a little introduction myself, so I'll go through that first. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Fridays. I hope everyone is doing well. Uh, my name is Hussein Al-Rakabi. My pronouns are he and him. I'm an intern with the Sustainability Council, and I'll be helping out facilitating this session as well. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the languages, cultures, and histories of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. So this session, 3-Minute Thesis, is presented to you by the Sustainability Council in partnership with SustainSU as part of the Alberta Student Leadership Summit. The Sustainability Council is an academic leadership unit that works with all faculties to spark learning, discovery, and citizenship for sustainability. We provide students with courses and experiential opportunities that lead to meaningful careers. We create avenues for academics to join a central conversation on researching and teaching sustainability issues. So for today's session, sustainability leaders, undergraduates, to alumni, enrich our community with valuable insight on how to tackle, discuss, and address current economic, social, and environmental issues. In this session, we're delighted to invite a group of bright scholars to present to you in a 3-minute thesis format their work on a range of different topics. We will dedicate the first 20 to 30 minutes for speakers to present their work, and then we will move to a Q&A session. So let's get going and introduce you to our first speaker. Megan Malek is a fifth-year biological sciences student in the University of Alberta. She's a certificate in sustainability candidate, presenting her research on a capstone project. Her research examines the growing issue surrounding electronic waste and where it currently ends up. She also explores solutions that can be implemented to make disposal process more sustainable, including both at corporate level and the individual level. So welcome, Megan, and whenever you're ready.
In 2019, 53.6 million metric tons of electronic waste was generated worldwide. That's equivalent to the weight of 350 cruise ships. By 2030, it is predicted that there will be over 74 million metric tons, or 483 cruise ships, of e-waste generated. Evidently, this is a growing problem, but what happens to all this waste? And what can be done to combat this issue in a sustainable manner? Using a literature review, my project aims to answer these questions. First of all, what happens to this waste? In 2019, approximately 82.6% of global e-waste was landfilled or dumped, while only 17.4% of this waste was properly recycled. When waste ends up in landfills, it impacts the environment and the surrounding community. The clay liners or geomembrane layers at the bottom of landfills inevitably break down over time and increase the potential for hazardous chemicals to leach out into the surrounding environment. Electronic waste is often collected and shipped to developing countries to avoid high domestic costs of labor and environmental legislation. These countries don't have the appropriate means to deal with this waste, so workers often work in dangerous conditions and communities are exposed to harsh chemicals. This leads to a higher number of health issues and birth defects in both workers and the surrounding community. Lastly, e-waste may be recycled. Once recycled, any devices that are still functional are refurbished and resold, while devices that don't work are broken down into parts. Any parts that can be reused are separated out. Then the metal recovery process starts. This is very expensive and time-consuming to complete. However, if done at a large scale, a large yield of metals can be obtained and sold, and the profits may outweigh the process costs. Overall, this is currently the best and most sustainable option to dispose of e-waste. Recycling e-waste helps keep reusable materials out of landfills, including precious metals, and reduces the number of hazardous chemicals that enter the environment. This helps protect ecosystems and surrounding communities. But what else can be done? Governments can work together with producers, research institutions, and international organizations to address this issue. Legislation can be imposed with harsher penalties for corporations that don't comply. Producers can design products with less hazardous materials and with materials that are easier to recover during the recycling process. They can create devices that are easier and cheaper to repair, and devices that are designed to last and be used for longer periods of time. So, what can you do to help? Purchase products from companies that have made a commitment to protect the environment. Take care of your electronic devices and use them for as long as you possibly can. Don't follow the trend of upgrading your devices every year, and make a commitment to only purchase electronic devices that you absolutely need. Try to fix devices if they break. If you no longer need a device, try to sell it or donate it. And if this isn't possible, recycle. By doing these things, you can help reduce the amount of e-waste in the world. What will you choose to do? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. And we'll move on to our next speaker. Stefani Johnson is in her 5th and final year of the combined Bachelor of Education, Bachelor of Science degree program at Campus St. Jean, University of Alberta. She will be presenting her capstone project for the Certificate of Sustainability. Her project explores how schools play an important role in cultivating future lifelong environmental stewards through school community gardens. The mic is yours, Stefani.
Take a moment to remember some positive childhood memories. Maybe you remember playing in a playground close to your house or running to catch the ice cream truck on a warm summer day. Maybe you remember the thrill of getting your hands dirty in your garden and watching tiny insects crawling around in the dirt. Many kids nowadays are experiencing less contact with garden outdoor experiences. This may be due to lack of parents not having the space for gardens, or kids spending overall more time indoors looking at their screens. Many research studies suggest that kids learning in outdoor environments can be a very different experience from learning indoors. Garden play can actually increase a kid's emotional and physical well-being, as well as encourage interest and understanding of the environment and the interactions between animals and their environment. Many schools have actually developed their own school community garden to bring these experiences into the school environment for the purpose of giving students real hands-on experiences. For my research study, I asked myself, how can schools implement a school community garden in Edmonton, Alberta? And what are the social and educational impacts of these gardens on students in terms of environmental sustainability? To respond to this question, I conducted a literature review. First, I looked at how garden-based learning promotes students to have positive attitudes towards a more nutritious and healthier lifestyle. When students work with plants that are edible, they become more familiar with their health benefits. School community gardens also focus on the social aspect of communication and community building among students, staff, parents, and the rest of the school community. Participants work together to achieve tasks such as planting, weeding, or building. Through their lived experiences, students learn about the environment and sustainable practices. Several studies demonstrated how participants adopted sustainable practices at school as well as in the greater environment. Ultimately, students gain a sense of environmental citizenship as they become responsible for their garden. Teachers can also incorporate Indigenous knowledge and perspectives. For example, some schools include a medicine wheel garden, which replicates the relationship between the land and the people. These gardens can include both medicinal and culinary herbs. Ultimately, the success of school community gardens is largely attributed to constant community involvement of principals, teachers, parents, students, and other community supports. Some ideas for raising money include donations and community fundraising events. Overall, school community gardens offer incredible ways to become more ecologically literate and promote students to adopt positive attitudes towards the environment. Exploration and outdoor experiences plant the seeds of curiosity in our students and can nurture environmental stewards for life.
Thank you so much, Stefani. Thank you. Moving on to our next speaker. Shomagosh earned his PhD in molecular biology from Cleveland Clinic, Cleveland State University joint program. He attended the MPH, Masters of Public Health program at the University of Alberta. He specialized in environmental health. He loves applying molecular and cellular biology to solve problems in environmental public health. Today, he will talk about his Sustainability Scholars project, the biophilic urbanization in Edmonton. Whenever you're ready, Shoma.
Hi everyone. So most of us gathered here today, we have grown up in cities, urban areas. However, humanity emerged or evolved in the wide open savanna of East Africa. This means growing up as a species, we are used to sights and sounds of sloping meadows, wide open spaces, clumps of trees and animals. The outcome is that the modern human understands a good life to include all these different sights and smells and sounds from those savanna days. Growing urbanization means that our technological sophistication has shaped our environment in unnatural ways and scales. That means it blocks our views and our perspective and is at odds with that innate, hardened human experience and human nature. This adversely affects health and well-being for everyone across communities. Given that context, the city planners of Edmonton decided to develop policies that could re-establish these bridges between the human and nature. Now, using the paradigm of biophilic urbanization. As an environmental public health professional, I came in to provide my input in this, and I developed a policy cum implementation plan to do this. Now, the findings indicated that this goal can be achieved by working on three different pillars. Number one is installation of natural elements in the city. Number two is ensuring that these elements are not exotic, they are familiar to the people living within the city. And thirdly, promoting citizen engagement with such elements. Specifically, I recommended some measures that could be taken to make this happen. Number one is installation of green roofs and green walls along the urban areas. Number two, making microhabitats of various species within urban structures. Thirdly, developing places designed as social gathering or refuges. Fourthly, remodeling the transport system so that people get much more walking and biking spaces. And finally, maximizing flowing water within urban areas. So the picture at the bottom represents an urban system in Singapore, which incorporates multiple natural and ecosystem services while still being seamlessly integrated into the urban technological landscape. Properly implemented, Edmonton has the potential to become more and not less green, as it doubles from 1 million to 2 million citizens. Greener as we grow is the optimal solution to build a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shoma. Thank you. Moving on to our next speaker. Marlee Chrystian is an undergraduate student at the Alberta School of Business, majoring in marketing with a minor in business economics and law. She enrolled in the Certificate of Sustainability as she was inspired by the potential to positively impact both environmental and social sustainability related issues. Marlee's goal is to find a future where she can create a voice or take a stand for the issues she's passionate about. Today, she will talk on the impact of menstrual products. The mic is yours, Marlee.
How many days does the average woman bleed in her lifetime? According to the New York Times, she bleeds for 2,535 days. Now, did me saying she bleeds make you squirm in your chair a little? That's what I'd like to talk to you about today. My name is Marlee Christian, and I was interested in researching the environmental, social, and economic sustainability impacts that are prevalent in the feminine hygiene product industry and some of the possible available solutions and alternatives. According to Duquesne University, only 34% of Canadian women are comfortable talking about their period with their peers. This is a taboo that has penetrated social global norms for as long as menstruation has been documented. And although in some regions, this lack of conversation is greater, breaking down that barrier was the inspiration for the route my sustainability project has taken. So from the environmental perspective, I wanted to explore why there are so many functional, eco-friendly products on the market, yet sanitary pads and tampons still make up a combined 62% of the global industry, according to Statista's 2018 industry report. Unfortunately, these products are made up pervasively of plastic that takes hundreds of thousands of years to decompose. And on average, one woman can use up to 16,800 tampons in her lifetime. In my research, I look at how marketing from key industry players tends to favor disposable products as they generate a higher, steadier flow of revenue, and how the lack of education surrounding these eco-friendly options, especially in menstrual education classes, reinforces the normality of these plastic products, because learning about things like menstrual cups can put women in more contact with her bodily fluids that she might be comfortable with. Imagine having a full menstrual cup in a public washroom. What do you do with all that blood? So this portion of my research is concluded by sharing some recommendations and personal experience with more environmentally friendly options, showcasing the difference that making the switch can make in terms of waste reduction, and calling to attention the resources that are currently available for helping young girls, women's, and other menstruators help find the best fit for them. From a social and economic lens, I wanted to learn more about the topic of period poverty. Period poverty is described as having lack of access to sanitary products due to financial constraints. For example, there's a study done by Kotex that showed 1 in 5 women missed work or school due to this issue. In my paper, I explore how this gender-specific cost for an unavoidable symptom of an evolutionary function negatively impacts low-income women and the cost to women in general. However, there is a light at the end of this bloody tunnel. I conclude this part of my research by highlighting steps that are being taken already to reduce these negative social impacts, such as countries removing sales taxes from these products, offering them free in schools or in prisons, or in the case of Scotland, countrywide. Through this research, I'm hoping to shed even more light into what can be done and is already being done to shift this industry towards being better for the environment and for the women of the world. After reading my paper, I hope that when you hear the word menstruation, you feel empowered to share this information and be a part of the sustainability movement that is happening just behind the blood. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Marlee. Thank you. On to our next speaker. Meisha Elahi is in her 4th year of a general science degree. She is a double major in biology and psychology and pursuing a certificate in sustainability. In the face of climate change and its disproportionate effects on the most vulnerable communities in society, Meisha believes that it is essential to hold government and organizations accountable, like the United Nations Adaptation Fund. Today, Meisha will take us through an overview and critical analysis of the projects in the Adaptation Fund. Whenever you're ready, Meisha.
Thank you, Hussein. So the United Nations has referred to Indigenous peoples as the unsung heroes of conservation. When you consider that 80% of the world's biodiversity and cultural diversity is protected and upheld by Indigenous peoples, it becomes abundantly clear why Indigenous peoples have long been known and rightfully praised as stewards of the land. Yet despite contributing the least to greenhouse gas emissions, Indigenous populations around the world are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. These negative effects are compounded by the marginalization that many Indigenous populations face, which prevent them from holding social, economic, and political power in their respective countries. Adaptation projects are one way to ensure that Indigenous peoples and other vulnerable populations can prepare for, adapt to, and recover from the current and projected impacts of climate change. The United Nations has a dedicated fund to support developing countries and their climate change adaptation projects, aptly named the Adaptation Fund. The Adaptation Fund prides itself on its mandates for prioritizing environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Community engagement is now recognized as an essential component for a project success. Recently, the importance of specifically engaging Indigenous communities and incorporating Indigenous knowledge is being realized, especially in the context of climate change adaptation, which leads me to my research question. To what extent are Indigenous populations involved in the initiation, planning, and execution of these adaptation projects? So I began my project by systematically screening all 107 adaptation projects financed by the Adaptation Fund. Each of these projects have a publicly available project document. These are enormous documents that are hundreds of pages long and detail everything. And I screened all of them. And here's what I found. So 77% of projects had no Indigenous involvement. Interestingly, about a quarter of those projects acknowledged the importance of Indigenous knowledge, yet did not actually document any contact with Indigenous peoples in their area. Moving on, the next level is consultative. The Adaptation Fund mandates that projects consult with any impacted population. This usually occurs as 1 to 3 meetings with the population to discuss any issues, concerns, and questions they may have about a project. The extent that community feedback is actually incorporated is debatable. Here I found 14% of projects solely conducted consultations with their local Indigenous populations. 6% of the projects had a collaborative level of Indigenous involvement. Collaboration involves having Indigenous input at multiple stages of the project, from initiation to planning to execution to monitoring the project after it's finished. Lastly, 3% of the projects were at the collegial level of Indigenous involvement. This means that Indigenous people were the primary decision makers on the direction of the adaptation project. Critical to note, though, is that this only occurred in areas like Polynesia, where Indigenous people make up the majority of the population and already hold economic, political, and social power. So where does that leave us? The Adaptation Fund considers itself a leader in social sustainability, and I don't disagree. But it's clear that Indigenous people are still being left out at higher levels of involvement. And as the threat of climate change looms over us, it is evident that we cannot afford to keep excluding one of the most vulnerable and one of the most valuable communities we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meisha. Okay. On to our last speaker for today. Nathan Lauer completed his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Biology at the University of North Florida. He then moved to Edmonton to attend the University of Alberta and was awarded his PhD in November of 2020. Congratulations, Nathan. He also served as a counselor for the Canadian Institute of Forestry from 2017 to 2019, where he organized 2 professional development workshops, one related to risk of timber supply, and the second on Indigenous consultation. And this will be the topic of his talk today. The mic is yours, Nathan.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Yes, you got my name correct. Thank you for that. Thank you everyone for attending, for organizing. My name is Nathan Lauer, and I'm going to be talking about a conference that I helped to organize back in the November of 2019. So first off, I think most of us understand that our current land use practices are not sustainable. And I believe that the key to making these practices sustainable is by working with Indigenous people. So I've organized this conference, and what I'm going to do is just echo some of the voices and sentiments of my Indigenous speakers and panelists. So I'm just kind of echoing sentiments here. First issue that I wanted to address was the day the sky turned red in Edmonton on May 30th, 2019. Middle of the day, street lights were on, massive plumes of smoke in the air from some distant fire, northern Alberta, maybe in British Columbia, just a huge accumulation of smoke in the air. Dr. Pat McCormick, she introduced a paradigm where she first started off with Indigenous burning practices, basically the strategic lighting of fires, and that was in order to create grassland for bison. This practice was outlawed, and a policy of fire suppression was implemented in the 1920s. Fire suppression is a European forestry practice. Since the 1920s, there's been a 180 from the indigenous burning practices. Pat McCormick noted that this led to an accumulation of biomass in the forest, and she claims that this is to these massive wildfires and large amounts of smoke that we're seeing today in these wildfires. So in my opinion, I think this is an issue where policy can be reviewed. We can incorporate indigenous knowledge values to solve some of the problems that we're seeing today. Another issue that I think deserves a policy review is the use of herbicides in the forest. So today, if you're looking at the center today, foresters will go and spray aspen trees with Roundup. That'll kill off those lighter colored trees that you're seeing in the aerial photo in favor of spruce trees, which are the darker colored trees in the photo. This is from a business perspective, makes a lot of sense. You're maximizing profits. You're allowing more profitable timber like spruce to grow. But Fabian Gray, one of my panelists, came up and spoke up about this issue very passionately. In fact, we all got yelled at that day in the meeting because the spraying of glyphosate actually kills understory plants, in particular the medicine plants. So several other of the speakers also noted that forestry needs to kind of move away from herbicides. Doesn't look good from a public perspective, and it certainly doesn't look good for indigenous communities. Several speakers actually suggested using a bended tactic, which is the photo on the far right there. And this actually is people going into the forest, chopping down aspen trees instead of using herbicides in order to allow spruce trees to grow. So this photo in particular is nice because it's actually an indigenous youth who is working with the forestry company. So this is a young person who is getting job experience, getting money in their pocket, getting a driver's license, participating in the economy, which is a good thing. So finally, I'd like to talk about what my keynote speakers spoke about. The first thing is inclusion of indigenous communities in forestry practices. So that's inclusion at the planning stages. So that's in order to incorporate indigenous values into operations, and also inclusion in economic benefits as well. Dr. Peggy Smith also developed a standalone indigenous policy for education for foresters in Ontario. So I'm hoping that this kind of education of foresters will multiply and kind of go into other provinces. Let's see, another issue is that that change takes time. So these things do take time to kind of implement. So we got to be patient. So after all of the history of Western society and indigenous people, all of the bad history, indigenous people are still willing to work with us, work with Western society to help us to meet our sustainability goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Yeah. So this concludes our 3-minute thesis session and concludes our speakers' presentations. Now we will move on to the Q&A session. So we have a question in the chat about the capstone project. So I believe that's directed to Megan and Stefani. So they're asking, how did you decide on what to research when choosing your capstone project?
I guess I can start with that. So when choosing to research electronic waste, it's just something that I thought is a very important issue to me, and just something that I found really interesting. Like when I was doing research in the topic, I was very interested in it. Like it didn't feel like I was doing research. Like it felt like I was doing something that I really cared about and I really wanted to make a difference in. And I think a lot of that was just spurred from my personal life. I grew up in a big family, just seeing, like, I was cleaning my house the other day and just seeing like all the old iPods and all the old laptops that we had, and, you know, just thinking like, that's a lot of waste. And what can I do in my personal life to try to prevent this from happening to me? So really, if you're trying to find something for your certificate project, my best advice is to pick something that you're really interested in. There's so many different topics when it comes to sustainability. There's one that will be out there for you.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, it's clearly you're very passionate about e-waste. I had a question for you, but I'll leave the chance for the audience first. Stephanie, do you have anything else to add on how you picked your project?
Yeah, my answer is pretty similar to Megan in the terms that I picked something that I was very passionate about. As I'm in the double degree, so sciences and education, I wanted to focus on something that was education related, but also environment. And I thought it was very interesting when I was looking at the research about like gardens and kids working in playing in gardens and stuff like that, how little interaction kids have nowadays with their gardens. But it also was very interesting for me to see how those experiences, when they are brought in schools, how much of an impact they can have on kids. And so for me, that was really interesting to see that, especially as a future teacher, if that's something that I can incorporate in my own teaching at the school that I'm at.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have another question from Leah, and it's directed to Marlee. So Leah's asking, where do we find more information about your research?
Thank you. So I actually am also part of the certificate of the sustainability. So my research was submitted to the Sustainability Council. And so I'm not sure if they share our research publicly on their platform. I would have to have more information about that, but I can also just personally share it with you. It's a research paper, so I can just put my link up and make it public for everyone. But on the last question as well, like a cool thing about the certificate is that they also pair you up with a partner. So I was paired up with a doctor who actually worked in kinesiology, and they help you decide on your project as well. So you kind of submit a few ideas that you have, and then they talk you through it. So you're working directly with someone who has a lot of experience, which is kind of nice.
Thank you, Marlee. Thank you. Maya, could you, I'm not sure about, like if we're sharing the certificate projects on our website. Do you have any intel on that?
Sure. I see Jasmine is here as well, so I might, if she's around, I might ask her to jump in too. We do have previous scholars projects that are available for viewing and perusing and reading on our website. So if you just go to the link that's been shared, you'll be able to do that. And yeah, I'll let Jasmine. I see her here, so I'll let her jump in.
Yes, I'd be happy to step in here. My name is Jasmine, and I work at the Sustainability Council, and one of the programs that I directly manage is the Certificate in Sustainability. So yeah, I can speak to this a little closer. Just as of last year, we started posting the projects of our Certificate in Sustainability students on our website. So it's on the main page. Down on the left-hand side, there's a showcase bar. So you'll be able to go in and see past projects of various topics and formats. And so Marlee and all of the other certificate students who presented here, their projects will be posted on our website if they consent to that.
Thank you, Jasmine. Another question about the certificate. Lisa is asking, is it available for graduate students or is it only undergrad?
It's only an undergraduate certificate. And having said that, though, we do have opportunities for graduate students. The internship that I think both actually Nathan and Shomo did, which is Sustainability Scholars. So that's a part-time internship that graduate students can do at a local organization that's wanting to further their sustainability goals. So the grad students are partnered with an organization, and it's kind of like a job application, and it's not just like an unlimited number, but yeah, you're partnered with the organization and work there for like 250 hours. So we'll soon, probably next month, we'll be having Sustainability Scholars postings up on the career website and also on our website. So please check back on the Sustainability Scholars page to see about those opportunities.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you, Jasmine.
I have a couple questions for our speakers. I'll start with Shomo. So you have an impressive resume. You did your PhD, and then you did like your MPH. So that's, I don't know, like I don't have much knowledge about that, but like traditionally people go from like a master's degree to a PhD, but you finished your PhD and then you did like a master's in public health. So what was your, your drive? What was your like motivation to like come to Edmonton and do your MPH in environmental health?
Thank you, Hussein. That's a very good question. So I earned my doctorate in molecular biology, and I wanted to apply the research skills, the research knowledge to solve like everyday problems, like in the applied area. Now, the thing is with an academic research, that is, I wish I could say that is what happens, but it's not the truth always. So public health degree, what it does is it helped me to tie down my rigorous research background to solving solutions to solving problems in the public health space. So kind of making my career more application oriented. That was my drive. As for coming to Edmonton, well, I like cities which are cities but not too large. And well, I decided to shift from USA because of, I mean, you know what, everyone knows what. So for me, Canada was more safe space. So that is it.
Thank you, Shomo. And we're glad you made that decision and you're here with us.
Thank you so much. Love to be here.
Absolutely. Question for Megan from Jasmine. In your research, did you find any brands of electronics that have a longer shelf life, so they would need to be replaced less often?
That's a really good question. And I didn't directly address that question in my research, but one interesting thing that I did find was I found an article published by Greenpeace in 2018 that actually ranked different brands of electronics on a scale from A+ being very sustainable to a scale of F. And one very surprising thing that I found was Amazon was rated an F, whereas electronic companies such as Apple was rated B-, and a B- was the highest ranking that any company on that list received. So sorry that didn't answer your question directly, but I do think that was something very interesting that came out of my research.
Thank you, Megan. We have 6 minutes left, so I have a couple questions. First, question for Meisha. It might be obvious, but why do you think there's like such a huge gap, like in terms like of acknowledgement that Indigenous, people should be involved in the adaptation project, but they're not actually consulted and not reached out? Why do you why do you think there's such a huge gap in the acknowledgement and not actually reaching out? Yeah.
Right. So I think it's sort of obvious, right? I think in many, many different countries, like Indigenous people generally are marginalized and just aren't able to hold the same kind of social, economic, political power. I think an interesting thing, and perhaps it's something I want to add into my presentation, but didn't have time to, was that, for example, before, women weren't actually included in these projects very often, like not for the adaptation fund, but in projects in general. But over time, now the adaptation fund, like every single project that I looked at had like women at like the executive level every single time. And so that's a change and that's a switch, especially for a lot of these developing countries where it's not the norm. And so I think with increased societal pressure, and I think a lot of pressure from the adaptation fund itself and in valuing that, I think change can happen over time. I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but that's sort of how I want to answer it.
Thank you, Meisha. And is this development recent, like in terms of like women getting more executive positions?
So the adaptation fund is fairly new. It's only been like, I think like 10, 11 years. And so they set off with a goal of having social sustainability. And so, for example, if a project refuses to involve women in their executive teams, and when they would apply for the funding, they wouldn't be able to get it. in the same way that, so I would say the Adaptation Fund has been pretty good about it, but I know the older projects, the ones from like early 2000s, didn't stress the need for developing countries to really focus on involving women into their projects.
Thank you, Meisha. We have a question from Jasmine to Marlee. Did you find any cultural-based trends in the acceptance, prominence of sustainable menstrual products?
Thank you, Jasmine. That's a good question. So I focused mostly on the North American trends, but I did find some cultural trends as well that were kind of interesting. So for example, countries that are lower in development or considered third world countries, such as China, they actually had, so China specifically had a 2% use of tampons in their country, which is pretty crazy considering that the global average for percentage for tampon use was, I think it was 52%. I'm not looking at the research directly, but 52% global average use of sanitary products fell into the tampon category. So for them to only use 2% is pretty small. But the reason why that percentage is still so high is because period poverty is a lot more pervasive in the third world countries. So those are the countries where instead of using an actual sanitary product, they're using rolled up rags or socks or just wads of toilet paper, if anything at all. And that's why a lot of women will miss work, is because they choose to stay home because they don't have anything to staunch that bleeding. So while in the United States, I think it was 70% of women use tampons, and 98% of women in the US use a combination of sanitary pads and tampons. Like, it's a very high percentage. Whereas in those third world countries, they use less sanitary products just in general. I hope that answers a little bit of the question.
Thank you, Marlee. We just have a couple of minutes. I have one question for Nathan. It'll be a quick one. So Nathan, just a quick question. Do you think we should allow forest fires to happen? Is it a natural thing that rejuvenates, the ecosystem, or should we control it more?
Both. So this is a very complicated thing. So yeah, I'm not an expert in this. I do know that forestry companies are actually trying to mimic wildfires. So what they'll do is go to a mature stand that will eventually burn, and then they will harvest that to kind of mimic the wildfire. And I think that's because then you're using timber that is just going to go up in smoke. You're using it as a building product, and that's by far the greenest building product that we have compared to steel or concrete. So yeah, there's some places where fire should be reintroduced, and other times when maybe it should be suppressed around communities, but there does need to be some form of vegetation management so we don't have these insane wildfires that we're seeing today.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. And I'll hand it to you, Madison.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So thank you so much to Hussein and all the presenters for your time and effort and energy put into the presentations today. They were fantastic. I learned so much from each of them. And I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Madison.